When you think of any video game, the first thing to come to mind is probably its box art. For many, it's the first impression they get of a certain game, and can even influence the decision to purchase it, making it an essential part of the gaming industry as a whole. Box art serves as a visual representation of a game's themes, atmosphere, and general identity. No matter whether you prefer purchasing games physically or digitally, the same box art or store page art is typically the first thing people will see, representing to the consumer the tone of the game they're about to play. I think I am not alone when saying that the Xenoblade games have some of the most iconic box art that I have seen, and they are what I will be analyzing in this video. Before we get started, I'd recommend that you maybe take a look at the video I made a few months ago analyzing all the logos in the Xenoblade series, as I won't be talking about the logos in this video. Additionally, to support this analysis, I want to start by looking at an instance of box art which I think is a lot less successful in terms of its visual design and appeal. Everybody please welcome the Fire Emblem Engage box art. For the record, I have not played this game yet, and I don't know much at all about its themes, characters, and story. But I also think that a box art's primary purpose is to represent the game to an audience that doesn't know anything about it yet. But I think this box art is extremely busy, loud, and colorful. From the super vibrant skies and hairstyles to the agglomeration of different characters on the right side of the art, which weirdly contrasts with the humongous Marth on the left. And not to mention the giant cobra and dragon who are just chilling out at the top, and the tiny little ring in the middle, which I feel should be a big symbol of the game, but it's just relocated to a tiny part of the box art. And to me, the cherry on top is the logo of this game, which just adds even more unnecessary color, thanks to its red and blue gradient. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention that Colgate-chan and Pepsi-kun are also there. Despite the exuberant amount of content crammed into this box art, it still kinda works with the type of game that Fire Emblem is, being a world full of clashing characters and personalities, especially with the direction Engage appears to be taking. But if we're talking about what someone's very first impressions of Engage and what its world and atmosphere will be, I think that some people would be probably put off by this box art, especially when in contrast with this. Hopefully you instantly see what I'm about to say here. Xenoblade box art is designed to feel open, like the worlds contained within the games. The first thing to catch my eye in this box art is its use of color. There's a strong contrast here between the three main colors: the blue for the sky, green for the grass, and red for the Monado, all of which are bright and saturated to give a sense of life and vivacity to the world the art depicts. Furthermore, there are certain elements in Xenoblade box art that appears to be a staple of the numbered trilogy. The grassy fields, the distant horizon line, the blue sky, and the giant titan or landmark in the background. So far there's always been a character or a weapon in the foreground as well. In the case of Xenoblade 1, the game kind of revolves around the Monadas. I think it's a perfect object to have in the foreground of the box art. I think the art here, especially in the numbered trilogy, always provokes a sense of depth and distance. And I think the first game's art is probably the best example of this. The horizon line is so in the distance for this one, and with the Monado and Mechon scraps in the foreground, it creates a very obvious sense of depth on how far away this grassy plain stretches out to, which is also amplified by the very short trees you can see in the background, which are so short because they're so far away. And the scale of this plain is just dwarfed by the size of how big the Mechonis is in the background. The scale is so huge that it almost blends into the blue of the sky. Despite the art feeling so open and empty, it doesn't feel devoid of detail at all. The amount of detail in the Mechonis is just stunning to look at, and the foreground with the grass and flowers and different shrubberies just works super well. I want to quickly focus on the use of clouds in this box art. This is something that's used a lot throughout the series as well. I think here the use of clouds and fog creates the illusion that the horizon line is way further than it is. And it also creates extra layers, which accentuates the size of the Mechonis behind it. Something that's cool to me is that the horizon line cuts perfectly through the diameter of the center circle of the Monado, which I think just creates a nice sense of depth, and it kind of guides your eye to how far away the horizon actually is. I'm gonna skip over Xenoblade X for now, but I'll get back to it at the end, so I think it's worth continuing on the thread of the similarities between Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 and their respective art. So obviously if we take a look at Xenoblade 2, we get a very similar sense of depth and scale as we see the identical color palette as Xenoblade 1, with the blue skies in the background and the Titan in front of it, and the vibrant green grass and the characters and the weapons in the middle. Something of note here to me is that the horizon line is brought way closer to the characters, almost like the characters Rex and Pyra are standing at the very edge of their land, which personally at first I didn't really like, because I thought it'd take away from the sense of openness and depth from the first game. But looking back at it after knowing what Xenoblade 2's themes are about, having the characters stand on the very edge of the world works around those ideas of their world is coming to an end, they are losing land, and they're losing the titans that they stand on. So I think it actually kind of works here. Speaking of titans, we have Uriah, which out of the many titans in Xenoblade 2 is the one they chose for this box art, which I think makes sense. It's one of the most recognizable titans in Xenoblade 2, but I also think in terms of shape, it's one of the least remarkable ones, as it's just, a rounded whale. So the pose that they put it in of it like flying out of the cloud sea is really neat. The theme in these box arts is that the huge landmark or titan in the background is usually the end goal of the respective games. In Xenoblade 1, throughout most of the game you're trying to get to Mechonis, but in Xenoblade 2 you're not exactly trying to get to Uriah, which is why they put, the world tree behind it, which is the thing you're actually trying to get to throughout the entire game. And I think the layering here is pretty interesting because it shows that even though you're trying to get to the world tree, there's gonna be a lot of shit and titans to get to before you can reach it, which makes sense. But I also learned that the physical copy of Xenoblade 2 in Japan also came with reversible box art, which I think I actually prefer in terms of its design, as it focuses almost entirely on the world tree in the background. To me, the glowing world tree by itself is kind of more of an interesting landmark than layering multiple different things with Uriah and the world tree in the first box art. And I also think the way that Rex and Mithra are kind of staring towards the world tree, kind of envying it, works better than the way Pyra is just kind of staring at Rex in the first box art. And also the sunset is really pretty. And the colors are just super vibrant and it just adds a lot. It kind of creates a nice contrast for the world tree to stand out more in, which makes it work way better in my opinion. But I also understand that the blue background and grassy foreground and the red logo and characters is like the recognizable part of Xenoblade box art. So they're kind of continuing with it. But I think they're using it too much to a fault, because once you get to Xenoblade 3, some of the box arts start to blend together and look really similar. Just kind of takes away from the idea of how different the stories in each game are. And I could definitely see some parents getting confused because they look so similar and hard to distinguish, compared to other series and sequels which have very unique different box arts. Xenoblade seems to be riding this wave of using the success of the first game's art over and over again, which in all fairness makes it very recognizable. So as I said, as we move on to Xenoblade 3, we actually get to see a lot of the similar themes from other games in the trilogy. Of course, we have the huge landmark in the background, this time being the Orion Mountains, and behind that Sword March which pierces into it. And it's a similar situation as in the Xenoblade 2 box art, where Sword March is what feels like the big landmark the party are going towards throughout most of the game. But the Orion Mountains represents both the decay of the world and that their journey will be full of many obstacles and landmarks to go through. It also just works really well visually, as it's a combination of elements from the two titans from Xenoblade 1 and 2, being the Mechonis' sword, being Sword March, and the Orion Mountains being, of course, Uriah. If you zoom in real close, you can actually see Raybell Tableland and below that Ribby Flats in the distance as well. Where I think the Xenoblade 3 box art works a bit less well is that it uses the fog to kind of create a pseudo horizon line. Like it almost seems to blend the foreground grass into the landmark in the background, and it just uses the fog to cover up what would be a sharp line. I think it would have worked maybe a bit better if it was similar to Xenoblade 2 and there was like a cliff and then you could see the rest of the stuff in the background. But I also do like the movement that's created by seeing the characters walking towards the background. When I say the characters, only Tion's actually in motion. The other characters are all just standing there looking towards the distance. And I think that actually works pretty well, since Tion's whole character arc is built around him taking initiative. Of course, this is the game which has the most characters present in the art, which makes sense as Xenoblade 2's party has way too many characters if you include all the blades to put into the art. Whereas Xenoblade 3 has a very clear 6-membered cast in the form of Ouroboros, and the story this time around very heavily revolves on each and every one of them and their interaction. So I think it makes a lot of sense to have them all represented in the art, instead of just Noah and Mio, or just Noah's sword. Now, I was disappointed to realize that Xenoblade 3 did not have a reversible cover in the Japanese edition. But I thought it would be pretty interesting to continue the themes of what Xenoblade 2 was doing with the sunset, and wondered about what the Xenoblade 3 box art would look like at night, or more specifically during the eclipse, which is a huge theme of the game. So I actually went into Photoshop and tried to see what I could create. And while it's not perfect, I think I really like the colors I managed to put into this image. Let me know your thoughts, and I think if you put Xenoblade 1, 2, and 3 in a row, it looks really interesting, with the passage of time represented in the day and night cycle. It's also cool to note that the Xenoblade 3 expansion pass key art that we have so far takes place at night, so maybe they're gonna work around that theme of nighttime and the passage of time with that expansion DLC. I guess we'll see once that releases. Now, I know I skipped Torna earlier, but I think I'd like to quickly cover why that one is also interesting. I'll admit I don't know as much about Torna as the other games, as that's the one part of the Xenoblade story that I'm yet to watch or play myself, but I still know the general themes of what happens in it. The main thing I really like about this is that it continues the tradition of having a Titan in the background. This time, knowing that we are on the Torna Titan itself, it kind of shifts the perspective and leads our eye up towards the back of the Titan, following its neck upwards, and then you see the dragon head of Torna itself in the background. It's a neat play on perspective that it almost looks like it's a separate Titan flying, but if you follow the neck, then it connects to the ground that Jin and Laura are standing on. This art also uses a much more desaturated color palette, with grays and pale sandy yellows, which works perfectly with the more emotional and sad story that Torna is. Going into Torna, we all kind of know the outcome of what's going to happen in the game. The question is just how and why. And finally, it's a bit of a weird order, but we're going to take a look at Xenoblade X. And just quickly, I think it's interesting to note that Xenoblade X has two different key arts that it uses, one of which has the Titan and the cast looking over New LA, and the other, which is used in the box art, is the same art of the Titan and the cast, but the background is different, because it's looking over the other side of Primordia. Now, this box art puts a lot of focus on the scales, which, you know, has all the right to. That's probably the main appeal of Xenoblade X. But it's also a very different style of framing, as usually the tallest element is put in the background, but here it makes you feel like the scales are of like an immense size in the foreground, and then the background is used to show like how wide and open the world is behind. It's a different strategy, but it also works very well in showing the breadth of the world that you're seeing. Similar to Torna, actually, the color palette here is a bit more desaturated, but that works well with the more cold and grey color scheme that Xenoblade X uses with its futuristic themes. I wonder if we get more similar games to X in the future, if they'll use the visual hierarchy that they use in this box art, with a super large scale in the foreground, and then the world itself is a bit smaller in the background. It's a very different look, but I think they make it work for Xenoblade X. And that's about it. Thanks a lot for watching, and I hope you learned something about the visual composition of the different box arts of the series. And maybe I'll make a shorter update video once we get more confirmation on what the Xenoblade 3 art looks like. And let me know below what type of graphic design or box art or UI design you'd like to see me take a look at next. But yeah, thanks for watching. Sorry for the long wait for this. Been way busier than I thought I would be. But hopefully I'll be able to make more consistent uploads in this new year. Alright, take it easy.